What's good, YouTube? This is Boxing Wave, and we are back with another fight breakdown. Next Saturday, October 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern, live on The Zone, we're going to get Chris Eubank Jr. against Conor Benn, all right? And this is from the fathers. This is the legendary British rivalry between Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank Sr., who fought in the early 90s. Chris Eubank Sr. won the first fight, and the second fight was a draw between them, but it's one of the greatest middleweight British rivalries of all time. All right, so the two sons has decided that they're gonna fight it out here. And there's a lot to really address when it comes to this fight. It's not really about the styles and everything. It's more about the size, the weight, the timing of the fight, the lack of experience against the more experienced guy. So we have a lot to address in this video. And there's still a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of things I'm still not sure on this fight. As far as who is going to be training Chris Eubank Sr. and, who's going to be in his corner exactly. But we're going to discuss all of that here. And whatever I get wrong here, let me know in the comments, please. All right. But let's talk about this fight. I'm very excited for the fight because of the buildup. Okay. At first, when I heard this fight, I'm going to be honest. I thought it was a complete mismatch. In some ways, I still do. But there's a lot of unknowns here, and we just going to have to wait and see on fight night how this is going to play out. All right. But I'm excited from the fight just because of the buildup. Okay. The press conference was very entertaining. Chris Eubank is, he's very similar to his dad. Very, very confident. You know, some people may say that he's delusional. All right. But he's really, really full of himself, and he's funny. And I was entertained by the press conference, and I was even more entertained by the face-off that they had. All right, they had a face-off that was released a couple weeks ago, and following that face-off, we found out that Chris Eubank Sr. was going to try to pull Eubank Jr. out of the fight because there is a catch weight for this fight, there is a rehydration clause for this fight. And we're going to address all of that here. All right. So the fight is still on. It's going to be next weekend. And like I said, I'm excited now. Chris Eubank Jr., all right, the more experienced guy, he just turned 33 years old. He has 32 wins. 23 of those wins come by knockout. He has 2 losses, no draws. Okay. He's the taller guy of the two. He's 5'11". I believe Conor Benn is around 5'8". Okay. So 5'8", maybe 5'9". But Chris Eubank has the clear height and reach advantage. He's the bigger man. He is the middleweight. He's the career middleweight that's fought about a good 4 or 5 fights up at super middleweight. So he is the much naturally bigger man, where Conor Benn has been a career welterweight. All right, Conor Benn is coming into this fight with 21 wins, with 14 wins by knockout and 0 losses. He is undefeated. Okay, now some of the people that Eubank Jr. has fought, the best names he's fought, 2 of them were the 2 guys that he lost to. That is George Groves and Billy Joe Saunders. He lost to Saunders at middleweight years back when they were both prospects, and it was a rivalry between the 2 British fighters. They fought very close fight where Saunders won the first half of the fight, and Eubank Jr. won the second half of that fight. But it was very close, and it went over. The win went to Billy Joe Saunders. Eubank then went up to 168, fought a few fights. He was in this World Boxing Super Series tournament, the one that Callum Smith beat George Groves in the final. But before that final, Eubank Jr. fought George Groves, and he lost a decision to George Groves. Pretty clear decision to me, in my opinion. I remember watching the fight live. And, he fought a bigger man, a much heavier man. I believe Groves was above like 20 pounds over him in weight. And George Groves outboxed him. And since then, Eubank has picked up a good amount of wins. He's gone back down to 160, okay? And he's picked up trainer Roy Jones Jr. Now, real quick about the trainer. I'm not quite sure if Roy is going to be in the corner of Eubank. I did see an interview with Roy Jones Jr. basically saying that he is not going to be with Eubank Jr. But I believe I watched the interview. The interview might have been before Chris Sr. had allegedly pulled Chris Jr. out of the fight. All right. So I'm expecting Chris Sr. to be in his corner. I don't think he's just going to just go out there. And I know he may not like and agree that the fight is taking place now, and he doesn't agree with the catch weight. Okay, Chris Eubank Sr. Lost one of his sons last year from a massive heart attack. So I'm not surprised that he is a little concerned for his son to fight at a catch weight of 157, which his son has not fought at since what he says since he was 18 years old. All right, so and then he's fought above 160 on top of that. So the catch weight is an issue, and it is a huge handicap for this fight, being that Eubank has not professionally fought below 160 since he's been a pro. You know, I think 159, maybe 158 is the lowest he's been. And now you got to come all the way down to a weight that you haven't been at since you've been a pro. All right, so it is very dangerous. Plus, there is some sort of rehydration clause in this fight. And I don't believe it's a similar one to like how the IBF rules. If you're fighting a championship fight, there's a limit that you have to come in on a weigh-in and the day of the fight weigh-in. I'm not sure if it's one of those clauses where there's an agreed upon weight that Chris Eubank Jr. cannot exceed. It's either that, or I don't know if there's a weight that he can't exceed for the actual fight. So I don't know if it's the morning of, like a morning of weigh-in, or is it going to be one of those things where Chris Eubank can't go over maybe 168 by the time he enters the ring. I don't know. I don't know all of the details, but there is some sort of rehydration clause because of the size differences. So that was that makes this fight really different from the other fights that we've seen where fighters have gone up to 2 different weight divisions to fight someone else. We know Kell Brook, Triple G. We also know Mikey Garcia against Errol Spence Jr. Those are some of the recent ones. Also Rigo, you can bring a Rigo against Lomachenko, which I believe that fight was at 130. All right, so we don't know, but that is the biggest handicap here. And with that catch weight and rehydration clause, I don't believe Chris Eubank Jr. is going to be physically as strong. He is going to be somewhat drained for this fight. And that is the one key thing that I have some concern about when it comes to Chris Eubank Jr. You know, we know he's the bigger man, but if you're the bigger guy and you're physically not as strong as you would normally be in a middleweight fight or a super middleweight fight, then there is an advantage for the smaller Conor Benn. All right. But Chris Eubank did pick up some good wins. He did beat Arthur Abraham at 168. He also beat James DeGale at 168. He has some good, solid wins in his career. But nothing major yet. You know, there are fights like Triple G that we wanted to see him in, which was a fight that was almost made 6 years ago. We've wanted him to fight Charlo and some of the guys that's on the PBC when he was there. So there's fights that we've still been waiting for from Chris Eubank Jr. You know, Demetrius Andre recently called him out as well. So there's still a lot that we're waiting for when it comes to Eubank Jr. You know, I feel that even with the training from Roy Jones, and I forgot to bring that up. Roy Jones Jr. changed his style. All right, so when he fought and had those losses, and the last few fights he's had has been with Roy Jones Jr. Okay, and he's changed his style, and he's made his style very similar to the way Roy fights. Chris is a very athletic fighter. You know, he has good hand speed, he has good power. But when he fought the top tier boxers that he fought in Saunders and Groves, he looked very stiff in those those fights. He looks good when he fights everybody else. When he fought those guys, and those are the best guys he's fought, the success he got in those fights was based on him just being a dog and being, powerful. It wasn't really based on the boxing technique. He was kind of getting schooled on that area in those fights. Where in his most recent fights, Liam Williams is one of his best fights too. I'm thinking of stuff as I do to record a video. But Liam Williams is his most recent fights and one of his best wins on his resume. And you can see in that fight is a totally different approach. He is more of a pot shotter now that's reliant more on mobility and speed. Okay, not just being a dog and just lunging in with uppercuts and being a bully on the inside like we've seen in previous fights. In this game, in this new style, he's more more mobile, using a lot of lateral movement, taking full use of his jab. He's fighting strictly behind the jab. All right, and looking to surprise you with those lead left hooks or the left hook counters, or trying to get you to walk into something with a big right hand. So he's more of a pot shotter now. And again, he moves a lot more than what he used to. All right, so there's been a lot of changes made there. And even if Roy is not going to be in his corner, I'm sure he can still fight in a way where he's been fighting in the last few fights. And I think that would be better for him fighting Conor Benn. One complaint that I have of Chris Eubank Jr. is in the Liam Williams fight. I noticed that, with the 4 knockdowns that he's scoring all, he had knocked down Williams with like a few jabs, and he looked very, very good. In the second half of the fight, that style that he's using is good for him early when he's fresh. In the later rounds, it kind of didn't look so polished. I was looking for Eubank to try to make the adjustments and turn more into a dog in the second half, because Liam Williams was still coming forward, and he was definitely way out of the fight at that point. But Liam Williams was winning, picking up rounds because of his aggression. And Eubank Jr. slowed down dramatically, and he didn't have that same pop. And he was still fighting, being mobile and everything, and just looking to set traps. But he just didn't have the hand speed, and he just didn't look as strong. And I wished he had made some sort of adjustment for that fight, and he didn't. And it didn't look so good in the later rounds. So that could be a key thing, especially if he is going to come in under a rehydration clause, and he's going to be weaker in this fight here, even against a smaller guy. That could be a factor for this fight here. All right, but overall, I do like Chris Eubank more now in his more recent fights than I have in his older fights, all right, where he was more stationary. But I'm still yet to see him fight an elite fighter, to see if this new style and this new version of him is really, really effective. It's been effective against the opponents he faced, and Liam Williams is a solid fighter, but he's not really elite, So let's talk about Conor Benn here, who is the less experienced fighter. Conor is going to be 26 this week, and Eubank just turned 33. So he's younger, he's less experienced, but he's undefeated, and he's looking better with every single fight. He's improving with every fight. I'm noticing it. Great reflexes, good hand speed, a lot of power. And he has good technique for the most part. All right, he has good boxing ability, and he's very exciting to watch. The key fights that I was watching leading up and just doing film study, I was mainly focused on the Chris Algieri fight. Why? Because it's one of his most recent fights. It's against a former world champion, and Chris Algieri is pretty mobile. He has solid defense. He's a solid counterpuncher as well. Just lacks power. And most of the opponents that Conor Benn has fought up to this point really lacks power. and the skill set of Chris Eubank Jr. All right, but Chris Algieri is a good watch. You can see some flaws. You can definitely see Conor Benn on the defensive end get caught by a few left hooks, especially from Chris Algieri in their fight. You should also check out the Adrian Granados fight, where I spend a lot of time watching that fight and going over it and bits and parts of it this past week. And I remember watching the fight live. I was covering the Josh Warrington Mauricio Lara fight, and that was on the undercard. And I remember covering it live, and this was one of the more recent fights where Conor did not look so good. But again, it has to do a lot with Adrian Granados and him being so mobile in that fight and using a lot of lateral movement. We've seen Adrian Granados getting clashes with Danny Garcia and Adrian Broner and Amir Imam, which was his biggest win, right? And a lot of those fights there, he liked to exchange, he liked to trade, he likes to fight like a dog. And I've never really seen him be as mobile as he was against Conor Benn. Like I know I wasn't. I think most people wasn't expecting Granados to move so much, right, and be so defensively cautious. And the fight went to distance. I only gave Granados maybe 2 rounds, but it was still much more than what I expected. And it kind of did not make Ben look good, because Ben really didn't know how to cut off the ring. Ben wasn't really trying to set up anything. He was just trying to explode and throw bombs the whole fight. He was sitting down on every punch, and he became very predictable, and it was very easy for Adrian Granados to just avoid the power shots. For the most part, he would just move to his left and slip, stay on the outside of those right hands that Conor Benn was drawing, and he would just continuously step right around him. It wasn't until Granados his back was against the ropes where Conor would shine at times. But then again, my biggest issue really with Conor Benn is that he fights in a way where he's throwing heavy shots, but it seems like when he's fighting the people he's faced up to this point, he's not as concerned as he's not concerned about what's going to get thrown back at him. All right. And it might have to do with the level of opposition he's been facing. He's been so eager to get stoppages with every opponent he's faced. And Hearden and Adrian Granados and Algieri and these guys, Formella, Samuel Vargas, these guys are not the heavy hitters of the division. So maybe he's just trying to walk through these guys. Some he stopped earlier than others. And it's just because he just doesn't respect them and their power. So maybe when he fights Eubank Jr., he's going to be a lot more cautious. But I haven't seen him fight in a cautious way yet, And I see a lot of flaws in his games. He reaches a lot, with his jab and everything. And he does good things. Like I said, he's pretty good. He's solid. He's good at changing levels. I like the body shots. I like the counter punching. I like the speed. He definitely has great tools. But the people he's faced up to this point, it seems as if he doesn't respect them enough to want to be cautious about what's getting thrown back at him. So when he throws a hook, his chin is up sometimes. His guard is not up. His right hand is not up. Waiting for what's coming back. And even when he throws the overhand rights at time, it's kind of wild, and he's not looking for the left hook that might come behind it, And I'm worried about this when he fights a guy like Chris Eubank Jr., who has a great left hook, check left hook, Eubank leads with the left hook, and he has a great check left hook. And he has a great jab. He was able to drop Liam Williams like 2 or 3 times with a jab alone in their fight. He has a great jab. And these are some of the shots that I feel that Conor Benn is going to have problems dealing with. And I'm not even talking about size at this point. I'm just talking about styles. I'm looking at it in a sense of if these guys were in the same division and they were roughly around the same size, Conor Benn will still have more problems against Eubank Jr. than he's had with anybody else he's fought at 147. So now that he's fighting a bigger guy, weaker or not, like Chris Eubank said, I'm going to be 60% of myself for this fight. You know, and I think all of these things he said is just to get into his head. I'm not taking it too serious because Eubank was probably already in fighting shape, but he's going to cut down to the weight. I don't know how he's going to feel after it, but I believe that he's going to try to force his way to really make weight. And I also believe that, you know, I still think that he's very disciplined. You know, I know these videos of him eating KFC and going out to dinner for his birthday and having a big feast. I think a lot of it is just to get into. I mean, he's his father's son at the end of the day. You know, he's a Eubank, so he's going to do what he has to do to get in Conor Benn's head. But going back to what I was saying, if this was a fight between two equal-sized fighters, I still think the fight is very debatable, you know? Now, obviously, it'll be a lot more even, you know, because of size. And I think Conor might have the higher ceiling as far as, like, if we look at Conor in another 7 years, he may have accomplished more than what Chris Eubank Jr. has. Maybe. I don't know. We just got to wait and see. We really don't know. As far as who he's fought so far, though, he hasn't beaten anyone that's on the level above the people that Eubank Jr. has fought, right? And Eubank Jr. is also coming off of a win against a fighter, a dominant win in Liam Williams, where Williams had did a lot of the things that's similar to what Conor Benn is going to need to do to close the gap. You know, Liam Williams, you know, he had to get low a lot and try to, you know, he was trying to force his way in on the inside because on the outside he couldn't box with Eubank Jr. You know, he was just leagues above him. So Liam Williams did everything he could to try to get on the inside, and that's when he got caught with a lot of shots rushing in. And I think that's what Conor Benn has to do. And even if he does it more with more intellect and with more caution, he's still a much, much smaller man. And even though he's very powerful, how is that power going to match up with a guy that's 2 divisions above him? You know, his power is good against bottom tier welterweights right now. He's not even fighting the guys that is in his generation yet. He hasn't even proven to beat any of those guys. How do you fare against a guy that's at 160 that's much more experienced than you and has stylistically might be better, and he's bigger at the same time? You know, we have to put so much on the weight drain. How drained is Chris Eubank going to be on the night of this fight? You know, how really far from being 100% is he really going to be? We don't know. We actually don't know at all. Now, it could play a role. It could be a huge factor, or it might not be a factor at all. If it's not a factor, if it's not much of a factor, I think Chris Eubank dominates. You know, and I really hate to put a fight based on weight. But to be honest, the only way I see Conor Benn beating Chris Eubank Jr. next Saturday is if Chris Eubank is just so weak, right, that he just doesn't have the energy to deal with Conor Benn and his pressure. You know, he just doesn't have it. And I mean something we noticed early on. I mean at the weigh-in, his face maybe being sunken in, him being dry. You know, I think it's going to be something that we're going to either notice before the fight or right when the fight begins that Chris Eubank doesn't seem so physically strong as we've seen him in the past. Or it could be one of those things where the fight is we're going in late into the later rounds, the championship rounds, and Chris is just completely burnt out from being drained. You know, I don't know how real it is, his beef with his dad. I don't know if this is just another way to play mind games. Some people think that it was just a way to remove the catch weight because of threatening to pull out of a fight. I don't know what all of this really means at the end. It won't matter the night of the fight. But if there is real true concern from Chris Eubank Jr., maybe he's concerned because maybe he knows that his son struggles to make 160 as it is. So making 157 and plus having to deal with a catch weight or a rehydration clause after that, maybe he's really concerned because he already knows his son is struggling with 160. He's already fought at 168. All right, and he's 33 years old now. So I have Chris Eubank Jr. winning the fight simply because his style. I think if this style of previous style before getting with Roy Jones, I think Conor Benn would have had a better chance of winning because he was less mobile. But now it's really hard to get to Chris Eubank Jr. with his jab and his mobility. I think Conor Benn is good. But I think his size, his height, his lack of reach, he would have to do so much to get on the inside or get in range to really hurt Chris with something. And with the flaws that I've seen with him, he's going to have to lunge and reach in at times. I think defensively he's getting better. When I see people throw flurries against him and he's moving his head and he's getting low and he's slipping shots, he's bends at the waist good. I seen all that and it looks really good, right? But I'm not talking about that defense. I'm talking about the punches that's getting thrown back at him when he's hooking, when he's throwing overhand rights, when he's throwing those big power shots. I'm more focused on what's getting thrown back at him when he's throwing those shots. And I think those are the shots that's going to get him into some kind of trouble. He's been down twice before. Too, Chris Eubank hasn't shown any sign of not being durable. He's a tough fighter. He's a very tough fighter. So I have Chris Eubank Jr. winning this. As far as I'm concerned, it's still a mismatch. I think the handicap of bringing Chris Eubank down in weight, and it's the only chance that Conor Benn has in this fight. Because if this was a real heavyweight going up to fight a middleweight like Kell Brook did with Triple G, I would think that it would be just as much of a mismatch as that fight was. Okay? I just don't think Conor Benn competes. I get it. The rivalry is there. The timing is now. I understand you don't want to wait. Chris doesn't want to wait until he's too old, where Conor Benn is even more improved. At that time, a couple years now, the fight would be bigger probably a couple years from now. But like Chris said, I don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of years. Something could happen that could derail this fight. So look, I got Chris Eubank winning this one by stoppage. I can see him winning a decision if he plays it safe like he did against Liam Williams. Like if he really wants, I think, to get the best plan for Chris Eubank is to, stay in control of range, use the jab, move like he did in the Liam Williams fight. And the second half of the fight, go back to the way he used to be, okay? Start being more aggressive, Let's see some uppercuts. Let's see him outwork the smaller guy, beat up, and bully the smaller Conor Benn. I want to see the second half of the Billy Joe Saunders fight, that version of Chris Eubank in this fight. But in the second half, when Conor has already drained himself a little bit from the first time just dealing with Chris Eubank and trying to get in range early on. For Conor Benn, though, I think Conor Benn actually needs to play it safe and don't take any fight a really educated fight. You're gonna have trouble with the jab. Okay, I think he needs to focus on getting a knockout, but don't put too much energy in the earlier rounds. You know, give up some rounds in a sense that you want to be strong in the later half where Chris might be drained. Let's think like we're banking on Chris Eubank Jr. being weaker. So my thing is, let's go into the second half where he's already a drained fighter. He's already put in a lot of time and energy and moving and jabbing you to death. Let's get him when it's later in the fight where he is slowed down dramatically. So I think Conor Benn, if he is going to win that fight, I think that's his best chance. That's his only option, in my opinion. All right, so listen, not sure if I'm going to cover the fight live. Most likely I will be. So I should be here next Saturday. But please, if you like the content, smash the like button. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.